What's up, guys? Ben here, bringing you another video today. I want to do a video about the MVP race. We're heading into an interesting point in the season, and we've now had 3 teams win the 3 events. So we're in a weird spot with the MVP race where there's not really an obvious number one. So let's take a look at what I think are the 3 top candidates. Let's talk about what they've done well, where maybe they stack lower than their competition, and kind of wrap things up where I would today vote number 1. All right, so first off, shout out to my guy Turtle for the sheet. I wanted to go through and, really talk about these 4 players. I think really it's 3. Shotzzy, Simp, and Scrap, I think, are above Paco, because those 3 teams have all won events. I think Hydra's been very good, don't get me wrong. And I think without him, New York would be in a real rough spot. But I do think at the moment, because of New York's struggles, because the other 3 have won MVPs at events. Unfortunately, he is kind of a runner-up, sort of a special consideration. I don't know what you want to call it, special mention for this award. I think another key thing about this is that Simp and Shotzzy play, I think, very similar roles, i.e. they're both not the most aggressive sub-player on their team. Generally, as far as like engagements and pressure, they're more of when they have the opportunity to find gaps, flank, pinch, like make longer route plays. It's not to say that Pred doesn't do it or Bees doesn't do it, but you're going to see Shotzzy and Simp be more that playmaker in a lot of situations. Whereas Scrap is sort of the traditional flex player on that Toronto squad. And occasionally does take routes, but is mostly applying a lot of frontline pressure for his team. So, all right, let's go through it. So the first thing that's going to stand out just top level is that Shotzy's KD is not as high as Simp or Scrap. I think that's because Ant had definitely a little bit of a slower start to the season than the other 2 players listed here. But I don't think, in my mind, that really takes him out of consideration, because I think he played so well at Major 3. Let's go game mode by game mode here. So I think overall what's really interesting about these players is generally they're all like pretty fairly pacey players. Simp is actually the fastest of the bunch here. If you look at, KP10, engagements per 10, although Scrap does kind of have a little bit higher in damage. I think that kind of makes sense because sometimes he's in power positions, really locking down lanes. So it makes sense with that. And then generally all these players are averaging about a minute of hill time, so they're making a lot of plays around the hill. I think for interesting, the one stat that stands out here is Simp didn't have that 13 streak in the grand finals, I believe, at Major 2. So that's a little bit of like a highlight, call it a Heisman moment if we're in college football for the MVP award there. But one thing that I think stands out. So I think we talked about like maybe pure hardpoint. I think Simp stats maybe stand out the most. Again, Ant stats are very good. You see like the numbers are very good. Again, his KD is lower because definitely Major 1 and part of the way through Major 2, they're still trying to figure out their squad. And I think him and Fred definitely had some chemistry things to figure out. We get to SND, and I think this is where Simp and Shotzzy are definitely in the category above Scrap. I think Scrap had kind of a mid-pack sort of SND run here through most of Major 2 and then most of Major 3 until we got to the LAN event for last weekend in Toronto. Now, I think neither of these players are really like first blood king type players. You see that really kind of goes more to sort of your Tyler Abezies of the world, but they are applying pressure and they are getting a lot of kills per map. Simp barely beating Shotzzy on that fact, but Scrap is obviously putting down a lot of damage as well. Again, he's locking down lanes, and honestly, if you look at the map sets that Toronto have kind of played, kind of makes sense why Scrap is sort of leading in damage, because he's, posted up AR, playing invasion, like, peppering shots into people, backing them down on defense type stuff. But I mean, at 1-1-17 for Simp is crazy. So I think in S&D right now, broad numbers, probably Chris, I think, would probably be the standout of this bunch. And then last but not least, let's get to control. And this is where I think Scrap really starts to make his case, because he's been insane in this game mode. And it's kind of hard carried his team at times to wins here in control. You see, I mean, pick your stat, highest kills, KP10, and the engage stats are very high, damage stats are very high, he's getting ticks. I think there's a lot to like here from what Scrap is doing at that flex position role compared to these other players in control. That being said, I think it's probably a lot easier being posted up AR, but still 1-2-4 is like gaudy. I think Simp and Shotzzy stats are still like very good though, averaging like a 105 or 1.1 in the control game mode is good. And then let's talk my last kind of stat metric, because I want to talk about BP rating, because we don't have a lot of crazy kind of advanced stats, but BP rating's trying to get to a one that's sort of like your war, your real like catch-all to an extent, sort of overall advanced stat. And so right now Simp is a leader in the clubhouse, tied with Celium in Below that is Draza, and you see Scrap is 4th on this list, and Shotzzy is 8th. So if we go by like pure advanced stats via the BP rating, which by the way is an alpha, Simp will be your number 1 on the list. So look, I think a key thing, if you were to just take pure stats, you would say, oh, well then why wouldn't Simp really be like the clear-cut number 1 here? And he may still yet be number 1 based on kind of how voting works with talent, with the players of the team. But I think if you were going to talk about who's the most valuable player to their team, I think you can make an argument that without Scrap, Toronto would be in a really rough spot. You look at the overall numbers here for Toronto, and Toby's having a really good season. Jamie was super high and has really fallen off. And same in Envoy. Without Scrap, I think they would be in a lot of trouble as a team. As compared to Atlanta FaZe, which look like, obviously, you know, again, they lose Simp, they're probably not as good, but you looked at as a caliber of a team, they've been very consistent all year, and the numbers really show that. That's why they're the number 1 seed right now in the CDL. So, okay, to kind of wrap up, I think my thoughts, one is that Major 4 is going to determine a lot of, I think, who ends up as number 1, right? Because Shotzi's been the MVP of Major 3, Simp Major 2, Scrap Major 1. Okay, get that. And I think right now for me, it is probably a 2-horse race between Simp and Scrap. But that being said, if Shotzi has a really big Major 4 kind of push here, I think things could get very interesting. But if we look at like the body of work throughout the season, I think Ant's probably 3rd. And then it becomes a case of, but what is your like defining metric when you choose between Simp and Scrap? Are you going to go with sort of overall stats and game mode and contribution just purely on numbers? And even though Simp's on a better team, like he really is the one checking that box? Or are you going to go for their value add to the team, which is Scrap? I mean, you look at Toronto without Scrap and they'd be in a rougher spot than Atlanta FaZe without Simp. So I just don't know when the voters, which one they're going to choose between both boxes if you had put a gun to their head and they had to decide right now. But I think either way, these 3 are really sort of the key candidates. I think Draza's had a great season. I think Tyler Beasley's had a great season, but I don't think either of them are really going to push Simp out of this conversation. And again, I think Hydra's been very good, but New York's kind of struggles this season, really just being the 3rd or 4th best team for most of the year, is not really going to do him enough favors to really, I think, get enough votes to really factor into this conversation. So I'm really excited for the MVP race. There's a lot to still be decided here. And this is kind of a collection of my thoughts as to where I am right now, because I honestly, if I had to kind of take a guess based on talent and the people voting, that I think Simp might be the one that wins over Scrap, partially because I think Atlanta FaZe will probably get the number 1 seed in the CDL, and I think that may end up kind of squeezing it. But I honestly don't know, because I think this is one of the closer races we've had since really Modern Warfare 2019, when it was between Simp and Shotzzy that year. All right, let me know in the comments what you guys think of this MVP race. Who would you vote for right now? Take a look at a bunch of comments there. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more. And as always, guys, we'll see you on the next one.